just a couple of minutes or a minute or so to let everybody in. Hi to everyone that's joined. If you could put where you're joining from in the chat box, that would be really nice to see. Lots of people coming into the room now. Just a few more seconds. Hi, welcome everyone. So, about 1 minute past now, so maybe we can get started. So, okay, hello, welcome everybody to today's session. The session is called Finding Firm Ground, How to Truly Understand Learner Needs and Base Your Teaching on Real Data. Today we'll be hearing from Eleonora, Pessina and Imogen Wyllie. Ellie is a product manager at Pearson English Assessment with over 15 years of experience in the language education sector. She leads the portfolio of proficiency tests, including the level test and the 2 benchmark tests for young learners and adults. Imogen is a product manager with Pearson's adult ELT portfolio. She's worked with Pearson since 2010 and in ELT since 2003, publishing titles such as Gold Experience, and most recently the new Global Adult Course Roadmap. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. We'll be having a short Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So if you have questions for Ellie or Imogen, please feel free to submit them in the questions box at any time, and we will do our best to get to them all at the end of the session. We'll be sending certificates of attendance out at the end of this week, and together with a recording and a digital goodie bag or resource rucksack. And finally, the webinar will be recorded and we'll make the recording available to you too shortly after the session in case you would like to share or watch it again. So now I'm very happy to pass over to Ellie and Imogen.
Oh, hi everyone, and welcome to this new session as part of the Assessment Summer Camp webinars. First of all, I would like to thank you all for joining at what is meant to be a very prime holiday time in many parts of the world. So thank you for joining me and Imogen in this session, where the session, as you know, it's titled Building Firm Ground. And what we're going to do in this session is really to reflect on what it takes to tailor your teaching program and tailor it to your students' strengths and weaknesses. And we're hoping to share with you some tools and resources that can help you collect data on your students' needs. So this is why in the session, and as part of this session, we are going to use an assessment product, a Pearson assessment product, and an ELT course product as examples. And that is why you have myself and Imogen in presenting you through this. So let me just kick off with let me start by showing you a plan of what we are going to cover. First of all, I would like to hear it from you. I would like to understand what currently it happens in your teaching practice around understanding learner strengths and weaknesses. So we've prepared a couple of polls that we're going to use just to break the ice and understand what is current practice now. Then we'll go on and share some ideas of tools and resources that can help you understand learners' strengths and weaknesses. And then we'll go, as I was saying, I will go and give you an overview of an assessment product that is specifically designed to gather detailed data on your students' ability. And then we'll have Imogen from the courseware side giving you an overview of an ELT course and how it can help you tailor your program to your students' needs. And of course, we will have time for questions like Sophia was saying at the end. But let me kick it off with a couple of polls, as I said, because when we are talking about tailoring a program. Of course, that is easier said than done, and it's something that can happen in many different ways. So I wanted to kick off with this poll, with this question. When we're talking about tailoring teaching to students' strengths and weaknesses, how does it happen for you in your classes? How do you do it? Do you do it at class level? Do you do it at a group level, a group of students within your class? Or do you go even down the detail of individual students? So if you can just type your option, your preferred option in the chat, ABC, and I will ask Imogen to help me tell me what's coming through because I don't see the chat.
Yeah, sure. We've got some A's, some C's, but lots and lots of B's.
Okay.
Some A's as well, some C's. Yeah, so a real mixture, but I think the majority are B, so creating groups within the class. Yeah.
This is great, and it's really great to hear that it's happening a lot at a mix of levels. So it's also often one of the things that we hear teachers giving us a lot of feedback on, because on one hand it's always a juggling act between you know, having to tailor your program, but needing to meet your course requirements and needing to take your students to a certain point at the end. So it's great to hear that there's a lot of good practice going on. The other question that I have related to what we were just saying is, well, when we're talking about tailoring your program to your students' ability, what kind of information do you use? What do you base your decisions on? If you can just give me some some examples in the chat.
So again, I'm not sure if you can see, so we've got placement tests, student interest, assessment scores, students' English level and learning styles. So basing them on tests, on assessments, on written and oral assessments. It's all moving very fast now, quizzes and tests, what they like, so people's interests as well. Placement test, quiz. Yeah, so the kind of strongest theme, my own experience, which is an observation. Yep. I think the majority are tests and assessments with yeah, some other things as well, observation. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, this is great. And I think just from what Imogen was reading out loud, it's really showing the mixture of techniques and practice that are out there. They're all extremely, you know, valid and valuable. What is very interesting to me is thinking about these the collection of learners' data, thinking about when it happens, what are the critical moments in what I call a teaching and learning cycle. In other words, what a teacher has to do with delivering the job of teaching. And if I think about, you know, the idea when we're really thinking about tailoring a program is really about collecting as much information on learners as you can, and there are, in my opinion, critical moments where you can do that. A lot of you mentioned a test, a placement test or an initial test at the start of the year. Well, that is to me the first critical moment. At the start of the year, this is the time where you need to get to know your students. You need to, especially if you're working with a new cohort, you need to identify what they're capable of, what they're weaker on, and to me the stage of diagnosing is really a critical moment to gather learners' information. And these are information that of course can help you plan and can help you deliver your teaching program. But then again, connected to the job of teaching, of delivering your program, is very connected with the job of making sure that the students are with you in your learning journey. So having to check and monitor their progress, and potentially repair if you get feedback that raises some red flags. So another critical moment is really connected with the moment of teaching and all the work that you do around gathering feedback, checking how your students are learning. And again, Imogen was reading out quizzes, was reading out observations, all the things that you do throughout your teaching practice. And this is, to me, an ongoing loop that happens many, many times over the duration of the course. And it's really one of the intrinsic jobs that lies behind the job of teaching, monitoring that your students are progressing how you expect them to be. The last critical moment that I want to call out is in any course, you always have a moment where you are formally assessing your students, be it at the end of the term, be it at the end of the year, be it, you know, an external test or even a test that you want to implement. So the last critical moment to me is when you are pausing and taking that formal test to really understand your learners' abilities, your learners' strengths and weaknesses. And this information can again inform you in the next stage of planning. So with this in mind, I want to hand it over to Imogen to really present us with some tools and resources that at Pearson we've developed to identify strengths and weaknesses. So over to you, Imogen.
Thank you very much. I am gonna share my screen now. Let me just make sure I've got the right one. Should be this one. Is that working? Yes. Great, thank you. So to talk about strengths and weaknesses in Pearson, we have a standard framework of reference, the GSE. Can I ask you in chat, how familiar are you with the GSE? You could say very, I've heard of it, or not at all. Okay, we've got a very so far. Yes, not at all, very, very, not at all. Okay, so a mix. So if you are very familiar, forgive me. If you're not at all, this won't be quite enough, but we'll have a quick recap. So we used to talk about language levels in these descriptive terms. So beginner and elementary, intermediate, but they're quite subjective and they mean very different things to different people. Then we introduced this, or we did, the CEFR was introduced by the Council of Europe, and that was fantastic. It meant we had a common understanding of what was meant when we talk about languages, and that was enormously helpful. And you may have noticed that we now, and many publishers, use the CEFR bands as the names of our levels of course. But these are still quite wide, and even if you include all of the plus levels, it can take a really long time to move from B1 to B1 plus, never mind to B2. And that can be quite unmotivating for students. So the GSE has essentially gone back to the original CEFR underlying data and crunched the numbers in a slightly different way to get a more granular scale. And we've also built out some of the thinner areas, so at A1 and C1 with additional learning objectives. And all of this helps us describe learners' ability in more detail. Each CEFR level is between 6 and 8 points on the GSE. One of the reasons that we wanted to move to this more granular scale is to motivate learners, to show them that progress is being made, even though it's not enough to move up a CEFR band. So this slide shows the typical number of hours that students take to move up from A1 to A2 and from B1 to B2. And why are there two numbers for each? Well, we all know that learners learn at different speeds. So on the left, we've got our super speedy snail. This is the fastest that we could reasonably expect a learner to progress. And then we have our slower snail, so a learner in, I guess you'd say, a low and slow class. But as you can see, this is still a lot of hours, even at A1. This could be a full year. So here we've added the same information, the time it would take our snails to move up, but this time just 3 points on the GSE scale. And 3 points, does it depend on the speed of does the speed depend on the age of the students we work with? It's a very good question. I'm actually going to ask Ellie to hop in here as an expert with younger learners.
Well, I think it depends on the level you're at, as this diagram is showing, but also it depends on how much exposure learners have had to the English language. So, for example, if I'm thinking about younger learners, it will depend on whether they had some exposure to English at pre-primary, whether they come from an environment where they speak some English in the family and so on. It would also, to me, depend on what's the first language that you're working with. So, for example, if you have got a character-based language as an example that you need to start from. So I think to a degree there are factors that do influence the speed, and also the pace of your course is also another critical measure.
And much of those things, so the character and frequency, obviously go for all students, and that would really be our speedy versus our slower snail, and that's the sort of frequency of the class. But I was, yeah, I don't know, I was wondering if the cognitive ability of our young learners' age makes it slower to progress early on when you're still learning basically to form writing at all. Anyway, that is not the point of today, so perhaps we'll move on. So this is the hours that we say is reasonable for 3 points. Now, why 3 points? It's considered to be the smallest unit of accurate measurement that we can get on the GSE. So where you can be sure that the change is progress and not within the margin of error. So why is this helpful? Well, the increased visibility will help us monitor progress within a course and also make informed choices about our teaching and learning goals. What underpins the GSE, like the CFR, in fact, there's a huge crossover in the actual can-dos, is a set of learning objectives or can-do statements. As well as helping us measure progress, the learning objectives help us describe learner strengths and weaknesses, so we can talk about what they can and can't do. There are actually 4 different sets, slightly tweaked to different groups of learners. So the young learners sets takes into account the cognitive development of younger learners, which might go somewhere to answering the previous question, and so on. But essentially, these learning objectives are at the heart of everything that we build at Pearson. And that helps our different products and components work seamlessly together. Today, we're talking about tools to help us understand learners' needs and on which we can base our teaching. So basing our teaching on this data. Let's look again at one round of the teaching and learning cycle that Ellie mentioned earlier. This time, I've put it in a linear way, going from diagnose through to assess. And here you can see how these different tools could fit into the cycle. And the GSE is what makes them work together. I'm going to pass back to Ellie now to talk us through the benchmark test.
Great, thank you, Imogen. And as I said, in this section, I want to introduce you to a Pearson test, an assessment product called the benchmark test, as a tool that can really assist you with those stages that we were calling out at the beginning, at the start of the course, to diagnose learners' needs. And really get a picture of what they're able to do at the start of the course, and then to assess the students. And that is the moment that I describe as a formal assessment, whenever you need to take a picture of your student's ability at a specific point in time. It could be halfway through the course, it could be at the end of the course. Let me introduce you to what is the benchmark test. And in this slide is really, I'm giving you the key points of what the benchmark test is. First of all, it's a 4-skill test that is designed exactly like I said earlier. It's a test that its unique element is really to give you very rich data, rich insights on learners' proficiency, and I'll come to that in a minute. It is a fully digital test, which is powered by AI, and this means that all the skills are scored automatically. You don't have to sit through hours and hours of marking, and the results are available within minutes. So especially in this context of hybrid teaching, remote teaching, having a test that you can easily administer digitally, we heard a lot of good feedback from teachers and customers. As I was saying earlier, one of the unique aspects of this test is it's designed to really give you very rich data on your students' ability. So on one hand, it helps you identify what they're able to do, but not only that, it also gives you recommendation, actionable next steps that you can use and implement with your students. You can use in your planning and implement with your program. And I'm going to show you a little bit of that. I also want to call out that this is differently from the tests that you would typically get with a course that you're using. This is a test that is designed to get a picture of learners' ability, of their proficiency, regardless of the content or the course that they've been taught. So really, this is almost to the way I like to describe it is an independent picture of what your students are able to do, regardless of the progress that they're making with the course. Last point, it's a test that comes in 4 levels. So this was a specific design decision we took to really enable the data richness that I'm going to show you in a minute. So in order to help you identify the abilities at each level, we've split the test in 4 core bands. It is a 45-minute test, which fits nicely in what is a typical duration of a lesson, and it comes in 3 forms per level, so that the assumption behind this here is that a student may take the same level multiple times, and by doing so, they won't get the same set of questions. And last point, it's a test that is designed for learners aged 14 and above. So I want to come back to the richness of data that this test really can give you. And I want to show you the capability, the scoring capability that comes with the test. Just go back a slide. Yes, brilliant. So this is an example of a score report at an individual student's level. So you see the student name at the top, and what the score report in this first page does, it gives you an overview of your student's ability, and that is, as you see, that is expressed by a GSE score at the top right, but also it's augmented with a description of the student's ability, with which is crafted in easy to understand can-do statements. Is really this really tells you what a student is able to do with the language overall. In the bottom section of the same page, you see a breakdown by skill. You see a visual chart that tells you where strengths and weaknesses of these specific students are, depending on the skill. And it's tiny on the screen, but you probably can see it in the bottom section. If you've taken a benchmark test before, if that student, if Lucas has taken a benchmark test before, it also tells you how much improvement there's been. Yes, down there when you see that +12, -4, thank you, Imogen. It tells you how the student performance is comparing to the previous take of the test. So that is the first page of the score report. Going into the details, the real secret sauce to me, the real richness of data comes out very strongly on the second page, where you have essentially similar information to what I was showing you earlier, but broken down by skill. So for each skill, you get a score, you get a description, a performance summary of what the student is able to do. But not only that, you also get recommendation on what you can do next with your students. And these are showing up in the form of recommended activities, and these are activities that you can do with your students regardless of whether you use a Pearson course or whether you use a course at all, whether you use your own material. And related to that, you also get at the bottom of the screen suggested GSE learning objectives to move your students to the next level. All of these tests, as I was saying earlier, works regardless of what you're using in your day-to-day teaching. It can be a Pearson course, it can be a competitor course, it can be even your own material. However, if you are using Pearson courseware, you have an added feature. You are able to select the course that you're using. On the top right, I've got an example of that. And you're able to select the level that you're teaching with, and automatically the score report will pull out activities that are aligned with the recommendations that the score report gives you. So I'm hoping that I'm demonstrating the power of the data that you can get, and that is really critical to really gain from your students to enable their progress and to tailor your program according to their needs. Moving on, I want to show you the group score report, because essentially the same capabilities that I was showing you earlier do apply for the group score report, where you know, going back to our original question, how do you tailor? Do you tailor at class level, at group level, or a student level? Here you can get very relevant information for the group of students you're working with. And again, you get a description of class capabilities, you get an overview of their score by skill, but also you in the same screen, you have a detailed list that you can only see the start of in the screen of all the students in that group, and how and what their scores are. So hopefully with these tests, I've given you a sense of how this tool can really help you draw information, draw the data that you need from your students, be it at the start of the course when you are diagnosing their needs, or be it later on in the course. It can be halfway through the course, it can be at the end of the course, where you need to assess how your students are progressing and how much progress they are making. So with that, I'm going to now pass it back to Imogen, who is going to tell us more about what we have on the courseware side to assist you with understanding learners' needs. Back to you.
Thanks, Ellie. So let's just go back to the topic of the session, which is how to understand learners' needs and base your teaching on real data. So we've just seen some really phenomenal data. And Ellie talked about using benchmark to do this. We'll talk quickly about some of the other sources you might have, and then how you might use all of that data to plan your teaching. When we think about gathering data in this context, essentially we're thinking about identifying strengths and weaknesses, monitoring progress, and then about how you can make the most of your courseware to help. So first up, identifying strengths and weaknesses. You do this continually all the way along, but arguably the most important point is at the start of the course when you're planning your teaching, so that's diagnose on Ellie's cycle. And the most common things we hear from teachers, and this might sound familiar, how to deal with mixed abilities, how to find the essential material in a course that has to be covered, and then how to find and tailor everything else to specific needs. At the start of a course, you'll already have a lot of data. You'll have the information from a diagnostic test. Could be your own, or it could be something like benchmark. If your students are not new to the institution, you might have data from a previous course that they took. And of course, students come themselves with preferences and priorities, and often they have an awareness of their strengths and weaknesses. So we can take all of these data points and pull out the needs at 3 levels. And these are the ones that we looked at the beginning of the session. So at a whole class level, at a group level, and at an individual level. So what does the whole class need? What do individuals need? And can you group them? It sounded early on that yes, a lot of you can, and that's wonderful. But then you have to work out how to approach these needs to fit the time you have available. If you're lucky, you'll have time to cover everything with everyone, but in most classes, there's a need to prioritize. Just to say, for younger learners and for teens, the curriculum might be set by the ministry across a whole year group. And so you're mainly looking at learner needs in terms of student strengths and weaknesses, and the sorts of things that you could hope to discover from the score report. Just to say that Ellie and our colleague Jo Wiles have a separate session on tailoring courses for young learners on Thursday. We'll link to the registration details at the end. So if young learners is your area, then Thursday is probably more tailored. Today, we're going to focus on adults, where there are many more variables. As we all know, adults learn English for a lot of different reasons, and they have a range of goals and a range of contexts for learning. So some people need to be able to write complex reports and parse academic texts. Some need to be able to speak to business colleagues from other countries. And some students just want to be able to understand Netflix and read social media posts in English. When we were carrying out research for our latest general English course for adults, it was really clear that there's one need that unifies all learners, and that's to be able to competently speak to others and understand them in turn. And along with that, they need the underlying grammar and vocabulary that makes effective understanding possible. At Pearson, we refer to those as enabling skills, the skills that enable communication. So all students want a base level of reading, listening, and writing, so functional competency, but the need for more specific skills in reading and writing and listening was very mixed. In most course books, it should be possible to pick and choose to some degree. Obviously, some courses are more flexible than others. You're probably, if you have this sort of picture that we heard from our research, you probably do want to cover all of the speaking focused material and at least review the grammar and vocabulary. And in order to simply run an effective English class, you'll have some listening, some writing, some reading. But when it comes to more intensive coverage, really developing the skills, you might have very, very different needs. Ideally, you can group students by need. So maybe you've got some students who are aspiring bloggers, or a group of students who are attending an English medium university and need to follow lectures, so you'd focus on listening with them. Maybe if you're teaching in a university, your class has some students from social sciences or humanities where extended writing is important, and then other students maybe on a maths track where there's less need to write extensively in English, and you could focus on different things with them. So the needs may differ. You'll also be looking at your students' strengths and weaknesses. So if you take the benchmark test, the score reports, to see where they need extra supports and where are they already strong. But there's a need to balance the strengths and weaknesses with their stated needs. So what are their goals and how far away are they? For example, if a student's score report shows a weakness in writing, but their stated goal is social or spoken, maybe it doesn't matter if they're not strong in writing, if they don't need to be. So you're going to draw on multiple types of information, and then maybe you can group students into a few clear sets like this with different key needs, maybe. More likely though, it's going to be a much messier picture where you and they are going to have to make choices. So I'm going to show an example of how you can do this from Roadmap. That's our new adult general English course. It was designed to make this picking and choosing easy. The same principle, though, is possible in most courses. It might need a bit more work to find the core and the extras. In the case of Roadmap, though, what makes it super flexible is the dual track approach. So the book's split into two halves. You can clearly see them there in the spine here. At the front, there are the core lessons. These focus on speaking with grammar and vocabulary built in. So these are the things that we said every student needs. So in an intensive course, this might be all you cover in class. It's a ready-made fast track, if you like. And every lesson is built around a specific GSE learning objective. So this is the GSE coming in again. The full objectives in the teacher's book, and in the student's book, you just get a simplified version. So the author started with the objective and then thought, okay, what is the task that my students need to do to demonstrate that objective? And then they work backwards from there. So in this case, the goal is describe past experiences. The task they're going to do is tell a story from their life. And to do that, what will they need? Well, they'll probably need past simple, past continuous, and then they'll want to be able to talk about their feelings and talk about events. So as you can see, everything builds up, serving as scaffolding for that final task, and gives them a model to listen to before they speak. They've got time to prepare, lots of preparation, which means that they're likely to be successful in that final task and be able to achieve what they need. Okay, those were the core lessons. An easy way to find the most widely useful material. So speaking, grammar, vocab. What about the other skills then? The types of things that you're more likely to need to tailor to groups or individuals. Well, at the back of this book, there are develop your skills lessons. That's the shaded section at the back. These are designed to really help students become better listeners or readers or writers. So helping them really plug a weakness or focus on their skills goal. Let's look at a typical ELT skills lesson. This is a fairly tried and tested flow. We start with a warmer, maybe pre-teach a bit of vocab. We have the first reading or listening with some gist questions, then go again with some comprehension. Maybe we go through it again with some vocab from the text, and then we follow up. That's fairly typical. But what we realized when we were putting this course together is that actually what students are doing here is practicing. They're not learning. It gives them material and time to practice what they already know. It's not really developing skills. So how do we get them to really improve? Well, in Roadmap, we added this extra cycle. Let me show you what I mean. So here are the photos from an A2 plus lesson. From the picture, can you guess what the lesson's about? What do you think this lesson might be? Greetings, greetings around the world, greetings. Yeah, brilliant. Yes, it's greetings around the world, and the focus of the lesson is listening for the main idea. That's great, but students need to know how to listen for the main idea. So here's a sentence from the listening with some of the words taken out. Can you guess what the sentence is? Well, before the pandemic, yes, true, there's a pandemic one at the end, so greetings in different ages it could be now. So what do you think the full sentence might be here? Yeah, okay, yeah, you're getting it, but then you are professional teachers. You can do it, but you need the context really to help. Just as a contrast, how about this one? Is this easier or harder? Yeah, it's much easier, because even if you don't know exactly what the missing words are, you can guess and you can get a really good idea of the meaning of the sentence. And that's because here we have the content words, the nouns, the verbs, the adjectives. Nice. But luckily, these content words are also the words that are stressed in a sentence. The unstressed words are usually grammatical markers, so your prepositions, your articles, your pronouns. And what we want students to take away from this is that actually, when they're listening, they really only need to focus on the stressed words to be able to understand the main idea of a lesson. This is something that they can take away and apply to any topic. And so here's the full lesson. You can see how that extra flow fits in. So we've got our warmer, we've got our gist questions, and then we've got the gist box explaining how to listen for the main idea. So not just saying listen for the main idea, but how. Then we apply that in a very focused way, do a little bit of apply it to the rest of the listening. And then we've got the same, we're back into the main flow vocab and a follow-up discussion. So really trying to give people takeaway skills that they can apply to other things rather than just practice what they already know. Okay, let's go back to the topic of the session again. So we talked about how we can identify learners' needs as a class, as a group, and at an individual level. And then how your course materials can be teased apart to target core and specific needs. But what about managing all of those needs? Well, same course, as an example, here's the contents page from the first 3 units of, this is the A2 plus level. So you can see the fast track route on the left with the grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and then the critical speaking goal. And then on the right, the extended route with the additional skills here. So if you have time, you can cover everything in class with all students. But I think that's unlikely. So more likely, you're going to pick and choose and cover some skills lessons, skip others, depending on the needs of your group. So again, this is an example from a course that makes this tailoring easy, but it is possible to do in some way with most courses. You might just have to do a bit more picking apart. So if you feel confident, and many of you do, we know from earlier on, having groups working on different things in class, then you could dedicate 1 or 2 lessons per unit to skills and have students sit together or working in breakout rooms if you're remote now on different lessons from the back of the book. You could group them based on the diagnostic test at the start, on your observation of the course to date, or you could pass responsibility for learning back to them and just ask them to choose. But if you do that, then remember students are human, and some students will be tempted to choose the skill that they enjoy or they're most comfortable with rather than the one that they really need. So you might need to have a chat with these students and just encourage them to challenge themselves a little bit, or point to the evidence that suggests they benefit from a particular skill. If you don't have time to cover everything in class, then you can take exactly the same approach to homework. So give students different skills lessons based on their needs or based on their interests. Again, most courses you can pick apart like this if you look hard enough. So in Roadmap, the skills lessons are actually deliberately designed to work really well as homework or in class. Generally, there are discussion questions at the beginning and at the end, but for the rest of the way, they're designed so that on the page, they can be easily worked on at home. The meat of the lesson doesn't require pair work, basically. So this also makes them work very well in a flipped format. So students do the bulk of the lesson at home and then come together in groups just to work through any issues that they had. And then you could pick up the discussion tasks in class as groups or a whole class. So we've talked almost entirely so far about planning, time check, oh gosh, about planning at the beginning of a course, which is important, but you'll be getting information all the way through the course about your students' abilities and progress. So in Ellie's teaching and learning cycle, that would be the check and repair phase. In any course, there are ongoing opportunities to check progress, whether from your own observation, and yes, it is important, as people were saying at the beginning, looking at data from homework assignments or setting course tests. So your own observation, how well does the student understand your classes? How confidently and accurately do they respond to questions? How much effort do they put in? If you've got fewer students and enough time to really hear them all frequently, that might give you all the information you need. Maybe you've also got data from student assignments in an online platform. For most of our courses, ours is My English Lab. It looks like this. Here the data can really quickly tell you who's falling behind. It'll flag up red, and who appears to be kind of getting it. So here's another great place to get data on an ongoing basis. There are also in-course assessments. And most courses come with a suite of tests you can use and adapt at different points in the course. If you can set these in a face-to-face class, then you'll be able to control the test conditions. If you have to do them in a remote class, then you do have to have a level of trust in your students. Although, you know, some teachers are insisting that they're done live with cameras on so they can have a little bit of a check. But in-course assessments will give you loads of useful information about what your students know or remember from your classes, and can help hugely in setting up follow-up tasks and guidance. But it is worth reiterating that what we're monitoring here is retention and application of specific taught content. It's not necessarily, we hope it is, but it's not necessarily a marked improvement in their underlying level of English. Gone too far, sorry. At some point, maybe halfway through the test, maybe not till the end, you might want to have an objective view of your students' level. And this is where a course agnostic tool like Benchmark can come into play again. Of course, this time you're going to look at the score a bit differently. You'll be looking at the recommended activities for remediation. Just a reminder, the students' individual scores will tell them exactly where in the course, in this case, this is Roadmap B1+, they could go to review the content that they would need to make a little bit more improvement. And the suggested learning objectives for the individual students and then for the groups can give you and them advice on where to go next. This student, for example, well, a little bit lower on speaking, which is why we've pulled out speaking here. Actually, it's a different student looking now because that's 58 and 31. But you can see from this profile, they've got a slightly spiky profile. They're really strong in reading and writing, not bad in listening, but their speaking needs work. We haven't really mentioned this, but I think it's worth saying that this is, I mean, this can give you a huge amount of data no matter what your class is. But it's particularly it's invaluable for larger classes where you just don't have the time to spend extensive time with each student individually to really understand where they're at. In these cases, a tool like this is incredibly valuable. We're drawing to the end of our time, so I'm going to pass back to Ellie just quickly to wrap up.
Yes, thank you, Imogen. And I just want to end with this diagram that you've seen a few times now in the presentation, but hopefully we've given you ideas and examples of resources that you can use really to pull data from your students and to use this data to really inform your teaching. And that could be, you know, at the beginning of the course, during the course, with all the suite of tests and activities that come with the ELT courseware. But also, again, at the end of the course, you can come back to a tool like the benchmark test to really measure, to really get an independent measure of how much progress has been made by your students. And I think, you know, what I was gonna end on leads me very nicely into a question that Sarah asked us, which I'm gonna have a go, and then Imogen, you share your views as well. Which is a very interesting question, because it's asking us, is it appropriate to focus on a particular skill based on the student needs and somehow ignore the other skill? Well, this is my first reaction is this is in a way what we've been advocating all along in this session, just to really understand what your students are capable of, and being able to tailor your teaching so that you can remediate on the weaker skills. But also, as I started thinking it more deeply, it also comes back to what outcome are you looking for from the course? So is this an important skill that you need your student to master? So there's that consideration as well. You know, some courses, especially beyond the K-12 segment, they may prioritize academic skills or communicative skills. So if there is a skill that is falling behind, that could be also an area to focus on. The other part that I wanted to tell you regarding this question is, yes, it's good to focus on a skill if it's recognized to be an important skill that the student is weaker at. And, you know, it's also good to think about the skills that can enable the reinforcement of that skill. So I'm thinking about a typical example is reading and writing. You know, if you need to reinforce writing, you probably need to expose students to more reading, more language, more vocabulary, more grammar. So yes, it is a matter of focusing, but it's also a matter of not forgetting the enabling skill that can reinforce that skill that you're working on. And I hope I've been answering that question. If you wanted to add anything, Imogen, on that.
No, am I on mute? No, I'm fine. No, I think you've answered it very well. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you so much for talking us through that. Really great. We've had some questions. I think you saw. I just sent you through some questions from our audience. If you'd like to, we've got about 7 minutes. So yeah, if you could have a look and see. One big question that lots of people were asking was how can the audience access roadmap?
Oh,
Where can you
brilliant.
find those? Yeah, and is it possible to have any sort of sample of it first?
Yes, indeed. I put the link to the catalogue in the chat, so I'll just pop it in again there. So that does include, there are some samples that you can download there. It includes lots more information. And if what you like is a you know, if you'd like to try a pilot, something like that, then if you can contact your local Pearson rep, they should be able to set that up for you.
That's great. What else do we have?
Local, is it available in local bookstores? Hopefully. It's certainly available on Amazon and things like that. And sorry, that was the same question. Sample. Yeah, you can have a sample, units, things like that on the website, which you can access via the link. GSE benchmark be accessed via mail, or is it a separate platform? Ellie, that's
Benchmark is a new platform. It's a platform called TestHub, which is our next generation platform from my English lab. And I think related to this question, there were a couple of questions on the availability of English benchmark. First, I want to say it's a fairly recent product. It only launched in May 2020. And it is a product that can be used as an add-on to any course. So it doesn't come directly with any Pearson purchase. You can add it to your course. And you're very welcome to try it, not just with your school, your teachers' colleagues, but you're very welcome to run some pilots with your students just to get a sense of the capabilities of the test if you're interested. So similar process, you'll have to get in touch with a local sales representative. I can share with you the link of the marketing page with more information. So yeah, wanted to address a couple of questions there.
Another question we had through was, do we have similar tools for young learners as benchmark? I think they're referring to the benchmark test.
Yes, this is a great plug-in for my next session. So if you're interested in young learners, on Thursday, we are going at 1 p.m. UK time, we are going to have a similar session that is looking at learners' progress and how you can build a successful program to enable progress in the context of young learners. So we do have a similar test to the benchmark test that is specifically designed for young learners, and we will be talking about the interplay between this test and Pearson courseware. So if young learners is your area of expertise, of your area of interest, I highly recommend you sign up for that.
Fantastic. I think we've got time for one more. Again, on benchmark, how often do you recommend using benchmark as a progress monitoring test?
Yeah, this is a great question and one that we often get. And I think a lot of it depends on what we were discussing earlier, how fast can students make progress. We tend to, our research suggests that in order to make progress, of 3 GSE point on the GSE scale, you need approximately 120 hours. So typically, this depends on how many contact hours you have with your students and what the pace of your course is. Our recommendation in using benchmark is usually to use it at the start of the year to get a picture of your students' ability, and then probably depending on the pace of your course, the key recommendation is really to take it at the end of the year. If you are working with a pretty intensive course, it could be an option to take it halfway through the year just to check whether your students are on track with where they need to get to at the end of the year. But a lot of it, again, depends on how many contact hours and also how much exposure do the learners have to English outside of class. So
that's great. Yeah, and on resources, somebody's asked, well, one more minute, about Imogen. It was you, I think, you mentioned the importance of exposure at the beginning in learning a language. Can we give any tips on how teachers can help their students get to the right resources for it, for real, authentic exposure?
I'm not quite sure what was meant by the question. So in terms of intended as learning materials, then hey, take a benchmark test and you'll get specific activities in the course of your choice. If you mean authentic materials, then really anything and everything that the student is interested in. So watching Netflix in the original English language, obviously, or just reading, you know, British paper or American, sorry, English medium papers. So tune into something like the BBC site or some of the newspapers. I think The Guardian doesn't have a paywall. It's a fantastic site. There must be American English ones, but I'm less familiar. So just genuinely authentic materials. Obviously at lower levels, that's going to be trickier and you're going to need to work with a dictionary alongside it, but there's nothing like it.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. A good note to end on. Thanks to both of you for really engaging, wonderful presentation. Thanks to everyone for joining. As Ellie mentioned, she will be doing another session on Thursday focusing on young learners. So please do take a look at the programme, sign up for Thursday, and sign up for any other sessions that take your interest. Look out for your certificates, resource rucksack with lots of free resources, and the recording of this session as well. All right, thanks again to everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye. Bye.